Yeah, that's fine. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Het Patel. I'm a senior planner for the Department of Transportation and Transit Division for the City of Raleigh. I am the project manager on the Southern Corridor, and welcome to the live Q&A for the Southern Corridor. We will begin in just a second once we have the presentation up and going. And then we will get into the introduction of the panelists as well as the Q&As after the quick presentation. So Meg, I'm seeing the PowerPoint itself and not the slideshow mode. There we go. Thank you. So the meeting today will have a quick presentation that I'll go over for the Southern Corridor. And then we'll get into the panelists introductions, as I mentioned, and followed by the Q&A through the public input website with the chats and additional questions that may come up. Next slide. So we always like to start our presentation with a quick overview of how the BRT program came about. In November of 2016, the Wake County voters approved a half-cent sales tax to expand and better connect the public transportation network. The Wake Transit Plan identified 4 big moves, and big move number 3, providing frequent, reliable urban transit, is where the BRT program lies. This would provide more 15-minute service in urban areas with longer hours and weekend services. So it expands a reliable, frequent network and adds the BRT service to the local service. Next slide. So what is BRT? BRT is a bus-based transit service that has some unique characteristics. These characteristics include a unique brand to distinguish itself from the local bus service, includes enhanced stations, off-board fare collection for more easier onboarding and offboarding process, as well as just overall better user experience, transit user experience. It includes longer span of service. What we mean by that is the BRT service would run from 4 a.m. to midnight on weekdays and 5:30 a.m. to midnight on weekends. So that's a larger span of service than the local bus service currently serves. It would also include transit signal priority at signalized intersections to allow the buses to get through congested areas quickly or extend greens and allow some other options for the buses to get through intersections more efficiently. It provides more frequent and on-time reliable service. So what that really means is we have 10-minute service in the peak hours and 15 to 20-minute service on the off-peak hours. It also includes, sorry, I think it advanced to the next slide, but it includes a lot of those features that make it a premium transit service. So we have 4 BRT corridors that radiate from downtown Raleigh to the cardinal directions east, south, west, and north. They're all in various levels of design in the current stages. So the New Bern Avenue corridor is the most advanced. We are currently at about 60% design on the New Bern Avenue corridor. If you tuned in to the live Q&A we had for that corridor, we presented some advanced design details for that corridor. We did get a federal funding allocation for the New Bern Avenue corridor in the December of last year, and anticipated construction for that project is summer or sometime next year in 2022, with anticipated service in 2024. The southern and western corridors are currently on parallel tracks, and they both are starting that preliminary design phase. The presentation today focuses on the southern corridor. So we'll get into a little bit more detail on that. And the Northern Corridor will require a little bit more planning work to refine the corridor and identify a preferred route. So we will be beginning that work in the fall of this year. Next slide. So for the Southern Corridor radiates out of downtown Raleigh at Go Raleigh Station to Purser Drive in Garner via Garner Station Boulevard. And so the corridor itself is approximately 5 miles. It will have dedicated bus lanes in areas where that makes sense and where it's feasible. And that's the part that we will be getting to in the preliminary design work in the upcoming year and a half. It will include weather protected BRT stations that will also kind of have shown in the virtual open house. We have some renderings that are show what the current concepts of the BRT stations look like. And as I mentioned earlier, BRT feature also includes transit signal priority at traffic lights to help buses get through intersections. Next slide. So what is included in the preliminary design phase, what we call the 0 to 30% design, it includes reaffirming or reconfirming of station locations. So the Wake Transit Plan major investment study identified preliminary areas of where station locations could be. So this next phase of work will reconfirm those station locations, connecting to the major opportunity origins and destinations where people are trying to get to along the corridor. It will also look at identifying running way design options along the corridor. That includes the two graphics that you see on the right, business access and transit lanes, which means buses are allowed to get into those, vehicles are allowed to get into those lanes if they're trying to make a turn into a driveway or out of a driveway. But predominantly that lane is there for buses to get through the corridor. And another option would be a median running transit lane, which is separated from the vehicular traffic, and buses have their dedicated lanes to function and provide more efficient service through. It will also include assessing bicycle and pedestrian accommodations and how that connects to the transit infrastructure and the transit stations. We'll also include some data collection survey and environmental work, as well as the continued public engagement through the Wake BRT program. Next slide. And I kind of gone through the schedules from the preliminary slides, but basically right now we are beginning the preliminary design phase for the for the Southern Corridor. In the next year and a half, our plan is to finalize station locations, develop the linear footprints, refine the BRT running way options that we just mentioned, come up with some refined cost estimates for the corridor, and get to about 30% design by fall of 2022, and then complete final design between 2023 or 2022 and 2023, and then by 2025 begin construction. So note for the construction is that these projects are anticipated to have some level of federal funding contribution, and so the project has to go through the process of getting federal grant approval before we can begin construction. And current target for revenue service for the Southern Corridor is 2027. Next slide. At the same time as advancing the corridor design for the Southern Corridor and the other corridors, we are also working on a couple system-wide components that impact all 4 corridors together. For the Wake BRT program. One of them is branding. We have the name of Go Plus that we have come up with. It ties into the existing Go brand. That is something that we heard pretty clearly through a lot of our stakeholder coordination and prior public engagement. So this Go brand, Go Plus brand option has 6 logo elements that we're currently seeking feedback on. And the next steps, the process will be analyzing the data that we get from this current feedback and coming up with how this integrates into the station design work, as well as potential how this brand would look on a bus, on a BRT vehicle. Next slide. We're also looking at some station design concepts. And so in the virtual open house surveys, if you were to take them, you'll see a few things that we're looking for current feedback on. For station design, we do want to make sure that the stations are uniform to an extent that they can be easily identified across the entire system, but also identify some various elements of the station design that are customizable for the corridors or based on the context of what setting that they are in. So, providing that local flavor where the station is located and being able to customize some of those elements to make sure it fits into the neighborhood and the contextual setting of the station. We're also looking at some sustainability components as it relates to stations, making them solar ready, providing some amenities that make sense, as well as making sure that we are trying to identify materials that are locally sourced, some of these other components that go into the station design. Next slide. So this is, again, the feedback that we're looking on the station design renderings. If you were to take the survey for the Southern Corridor, the Western Corridor, or the New Bern Avenue Corridor, the branding and station design questions are tied to each survey. So you only need to take one if you're interested in station design and branding, but you can take all three if you're interested in the other corridors. Next slide. Lastly, we also have an artist in residence program. Dara Coulter was chosen as the artist in residence last year, and she's been working with the consultant team that's working on station design to identify for New Bern Avenue some conceptual ideas and inspirations for how art can be integrated. And then on a system-wide level, she's working to identify some blank canvases as well as some functional components of art that can get tied into the station design work. So there is some art questions as well that are tied to the online surveys. Next slide. And so that is the quick presentation that we had. I will pause here and we will go into the introduction of our panelists.
All right. Thanks, Het, for kicking us off. I am just setting my screens up so I don't accidentally share the wrong screen again. So to kick us off with introductions, we'll go through city staff intros first and then on to our consultant. I'll start us off. My name is Megan Finnegan, transit planner with the City of Raleigh, Department of Transportation and Transit Division. I am working on the WAKE BRT program with both Mila and Het. Mila, if you could introduce yourself next.
Thank you. My name is Mila Vega. I'm with the City of Raleigh Transportation Department Transit Division, and I manage WAKE BRT program. Back to you, Meg.
Thanks, Mila. Let's go to Greg from WSP.
Hello, my name is Greg Sauer. I'm with WSP. I'm the project manager helping on the consultation side of this project.
Thanks, Greg. And next to our municipal partner with the town of Garner, Gabby.
Hey all, my name is Gabby Lawler. I'm a senior planner in transportation for the town of Garner.
Thanks, Gabby. All right, so as we move into the Q&A portion of the night, I would like to remind our viewers, if there's a question or a topic you'd like the panelists to discuss, you can submit your questions via the public input page during the entire event, okay? So we did have some questions submitted prior to the event, as well as some preloaded questions. So we can get started with some of those. And one specifically relates to a recent update that was provided through the virtual open house, specifically on the selection of the preferred route for the Southern Corridor. So Het and Gabby, if you could provide an overview of how the City of Raleigh and Town of Garner chose the preferred route for the Southern Corridor and what factors went into this decision. Het, if we could start with you.
Yeah, that sounds good. So the preferred route that we call the locally preferred alternative, we had some analysis that was completed during the major investment study that looked at 6 different alternatives. As we began the process early last year to refine the corridor alignments and kind of start to eliminate some of the alternatives, we had a public kickoff event in February and March of last year that tried to get at basic priorities that the general public wanted out of the corridor. You know, do you want certain bicycle pedestrian accommodations? What do you want to connect to? And so there's a lot of factors that go into how we refine those alignments, as well as how they're connecting to other transit services, right? So we broke down the corridor into a northern and a southern section to try to identify a locally preferred alternative. And Gabby can get into this with the southern section of the southern corridor, but we have this corridor is special in the sense that there's two jurisdictions that are involved, and so Town of Gardner has jurisdiction within the route that was selected for that falls within the Town of Gardner's municipal jurisdiction. And the City of Raleigh has the right to make a selection within the northern section and some part of the southern section. And so what we looked at was, what amount of right of way was already existingly available for the route to make sense. We looked at traffic, which corridor had more traffic and which corridor had less traffic congestion to allow for BRT lanes to be implemented more efficiently. And then we also looked at, again, the bicycle pedestrian accommodations, that transit user experience, what makes most sense for people to get to transit stations and be able to cross the corridor and get access to transit stations. So those were some of the key things that were looked at, and in eliminating some routes and coming to the locally preferred alternative that we came to of Wilmington Street, with Wilmington Street extension going into Town of Gardner.
Yeah, thanks, Het. So Het kind of gave us a general overview and kind of the big driving factors and how the locally preferred alternative was ultimately selected. But as he mentioned, early on, we decided to split it up between the northern and the southern section, with the southern section mostly falling within Town of Gardner's jurisdiction. So we did have, about 2 or 3 touch points with the Town of Gardner Council to weigh in on what they believed would be, Town of Gardner preference. And that was also being informed by the feedback that was received from the kickoff meeting for the Southern Corridor, as well as the traffic analyses that went into being able to figure out what was going to be most feasible, or what would help to accomplish, the goals that were identified early on. And so they're based off of that and the most recent touch point with the Town of Gardner Council, they agreed and we're in agreement with staff's technical recommendation of the South Wilmington extension. And so between that and the City of Raleigh Council endorsing the LPA, that finalized the overall LPA for the northern and southern, and therefore for the entire corridor.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabby. That's a good segue into my next question, actually, about the Western extension. So there was a question that asked, even though the project is early in design, could staff explain what is planned for the Western extension and what that might look like? So Greg, if you could start with this one, and then we'll go ahead as well.
Sure. So Meg, I think you're talking about the Wilmington extension or the Western extension.
I'm so sorry, Wilmington extension.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so there had been a project done in Raleigh, the Southern Gateway Study, and there was a similar project in the Comprehensive Transportation Plan and Land Use Plan, I believe, in Gardner, that have both identified the probable redevelopment of some of the parcels just to the west of current Fayetteville Street, excuse me, in the edge of Gardner and Raleigh. And the thought was that you'd be able to pull a roadway from the current flyover bridge all the way down to Tryon, cross Tryon, and then end up in the Gardner Station Boulevard area. Excuse me. So the thinking right now is that we will have a roadway that includes one general purpose lane in each direction, dedicated bus lane in each direction, and bicycle and pedestrian facilities on the side. What those exactly look like are still to be determined, but this will be designed to be a very comforting roadway, and then have buildings and development around it that truly is oriented towards transit. So hopefully it'll be a nice little place in and of itself, but also something where people can live, work, and go into downtown Raleigh or other parts with the BRT system.
Was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think Greg covered pretty much all of it. It would include the general purpose lanes as well as the bus lanes. That's kind of the key. And it was initially identified in this Raleigh Streets plan as well as carried into the Southern Gateway Corridor study and Garner's comprehensive plans as well.
Awesome. So while we were answering that last question, we just had a question come in specifically about the grade separation at South Saunders Street and 401. So if Greg or Het, who wants to take this question?
I can start and then I'll send it to Greg. So that is currently the LPA identified is from South Wilmington Street to South Wilmington Extension. And that is that location where South Wilmington Street and South Saunders Street merge. And so there is a bridge currently existing there. The early work that we will be doing in the 0 to 30% design is looking at how we come off of that bridge on the Wilmington Street extension and what type of northbound, southbound connection will be accommodated for BRT lanes. Current assumption is that we likely will not have any general purpose lanes going northbound off of the Wilmington Street extension in that area. But so that is something that the early 0 to 30% design phase will be taking a closer look at.
Thank you. No
Greg,
follow-up.
did you want to add anything else to that, Greg?
There was a follow-up question submitted, I believe, by the same person, asking, was the 90-foot or the 120-foot width chosen? I'm assuming referencing the cross-section.
So again, I'll start with this one, Greg, and I think you can answer if it need be. But the current assumption is that the Wilmington Street extension would be a 120-foot typical section, and that was based on some of the recommendations that were coming out from the Southern Gateway Corridor study and our current understanding of what it would take to have 2 BRT lanes and 2 general purpose lanes, along with the bike ped infrastructure.
Greg, do you want to add anything? I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you. All right, so there was another question about the route itself that I wanted to add on. So the question what has been called the loop at the end of the BRT route in Garner, starting with Het again. Why will the BRT be making this loop at the end of the route?
Yes, I can start and then I'll pass it on to Gabby for this one, since that is in the town of Garner's jurisdiction. But when we were looking at the South Wilmington Street extension coming into Garner Station Boulevard, through some of the previous development work, as well as development plans that are currently in consideration for the town of Garner, is identified that the loop on Garner Station Boulevard would be better to serve the Purser Drive and end of the line terminus at Purser Drive, that shopping complex that's there, including the Walmart. And one of the reasons to do that was the intersection of mechanical US 70 and 401 is a lot more difficult to have any kind of dedicated bus infrastructure accommodated, as well as even from a transit signal priority perspective, would be more challenging to get buses in and out of that intersection. Additionally, there is also a US 401 Super Street project that extends up to Purser Drive. That is the NCDOT project that would have also caused some challenges in the bus rapid transit service utilizing 401 or mechanical in that area. Garner Station Boulevard is a lower traffic, 4-lane road currently that could use, the buses could easily use that to get in and out of that Purser Drive location.
Yeah, so not too much to add here because Het did a pretty good job of covering some of the reasons that that loop was found to be beneficial. But, again, just to reiterate that out of the Southern Gateway study, there was between that and Garner's long-range plans, there is kind of this vision for that area and how it could potentially redevelop. So having that loop will help to facilitate some of that and support development in that area. And again, as Het mentioned, there's fewer constraints there. There's more right of way that will help the BRT to serve as efficiently as possible, which is key.
Gabby. Moving on to one of the other questions that we received on the topic of connectivity. There was a question submitted through the virtual open house site prior to tonight's event. And the question asked about local bus service connections, specifically between the west side of Wilmington Street in Fayetteville, where the BRT will terminate, and the east side of Garner. So Gabby, if we could start with you, can you talk about what type of connections the BRT will have with local bus service?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the short term, I would say that the town of Garner, excuse me, the town of Garner recently developed a local circulator route, which would provide that east-west connection. So it would connect from the southern terminus of Southern Corridor BRT, and then travel along 70 over to the east side of Garner at White Oak Shopping Center. So that would also provide a connection to the existing Go Raleigh Route 20 bus service, which was part of what the goal that helped to guide the development of the route for the local circulator route, was to provide those connections between existing or transit that's coming up in the near future. And so the town of Garner is planning to apply for funding through the Wake Transit Plans Community Funding Area Program. And we'd be applying for matching funds for both capital and operating expenses. And so, yeah, that will help to establish an east-west connection throughout the town and to connect transit service. And in terms of the timing for that, there's not a concrete timeline just yet, but the town would either be applying for funding potentially this upcoming fall, if not the fall that follows, so either fall of 2021 or 2022. And then that would translate into potentially having service as early as fall of 2022, but probably more likely fall of 2023. In either case, the town's goal is to have that service in place prior to the BRT Southern Corridor coming online. And with regards to longer term transit, there's also a commuter rail transit, which is being planned for the future, and potentially the BRT extensions, but those are both still at study level, and those are further out. And I'll hand it over to Het. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I would just add that the Route 20 that you mentioned that got modified slightly, I think, last year, and is planned to have some increase in frequency, I think, starting later this fall. And so that there is some additional frequency on that Route 20 that the BRT would be tying into through the local Garner route.
So staying with this topic of connectivity, let's talk about the bike and pedestrian connections. And Greg, if you could start with this one, how is the design team thinking about bicycles and pedestrians as part of this project?
Sure. So we are including a sidewalk and or multi-use path, or rather, a multi-use path and or a sidewalk on both sides of the street throughout the entire length of the corridor. We're also working to make sure there are connections to the surrounding greenways and other bicycle facilities that may already be there. I'm certain there will be some locations where we just may not be able to physically get it, possibly an overpass, things like that. But for the most part, this project is really aiming at bringing all components in multimodal that would support the bus rapid transit itself.
Awesome, thank you. Het, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think the only thing I would add to that is we're also thinking about the bicycle pedestrian accommodations as it relates to the station design work and even the overall BRT program, including the BRT vehicle, which we are going with a 60-foot articulated bus with doors on both sides, which would allow us the design flexibility to have bicycles on the buses. So bicyclists that are using the bus system, the BRT system, could easily walk their bike onto the bus and put it up on a rack or hold on to their bikes as they're making their trip.
Awesome, thank you. We did actually have a question on the BRT vehicles, specifically the noise of the vehicles when it is in downtown and pulling up to the stations. Can we talk about how, and how, I'll start with you on this one. Can we talk about how the design team is planning to minimize this noise pollution?
Yeah, definitely. So the BRT vehicles that we are planning for are compressed natural gas vehicles, not the regular diesel buses that you hear potentially in other local transit services. Most of our fleet actually now is transitioning towards a compressed natural gas vehicle. And so the compressed natural gas buses are quieter than the diesel buses. And that definitely helps from, if the bus is either stopped at a station or waiting for picking up riders as it moves through downtown, it will be quieter. And I'd also add, I think we are further away from currently away from service on the Southern Corridor. So as we work through the New Bern Avenue BRT program and actually the service on New Bern Avenue, we will be learning from that process. And there could be opportunities for where the BRT vehicles could maybe in the future be electric. So there could be some other changes that could happen by the time we get to the Southern Corridor.
Awesome, thanks, Het. And Greg, do you want to add anything?
Just to say that the relative impact of one additional bus versus all the other noise that's going on in a downtown setting is pretty minimal. So I think unless you're directly at the station, it's just going to be noise that sort of fades in and out with everything else that's going on. So as Het was saying, these are not vehicles that are as loud as diesel buses. So the hope is, again, that any type of excess noise will be muted pretty well.
Awesome, thank you. Okay. I'm sorry. As I'm clicking back and forth and checking public input to make sure I'm noticing the questions as they come in. There was a there was a question about the station locations. So I did want to ask both Het and Gabby, can we talk about how Raleigh and Garner will decide where to put these BRT stations and what sort of factors go into deciding the locations? And Het, if you want to start.
I can start with this one. So one of the things that goes into station locations is for a BRT system, you kind of have to have a certain level of guidelines for how you are spacing your BRT stations to be more efficient. And that currently is at about half a mile. Sorry, it's a quarter mile, Greg, blinking right now. I'll let you come back to that one. But basically you have some spacing requirements that you're following. At the same time, what we did on New Bern Avenue is made sure that our BRT stations covered 96% of the existing ridership on the local route that the BRT was, the corridor was going into. And so we would be looking at some of those, looking at identifying some connections to the local bus services and making sure that we have the, premier connections to the origins and destinations that people are trying to get to while keeping that spacing in mind. So all of those factors kind of go into it together to try to identify like that ideal location or space. The other consideration that goes into BRT stations is that because of what we are trying to do with the bicycle pedestrian infrastructure, we would place the BRT stations at signalized intersections to make it easier for bicyclists and pedestrians to get to the BRT station.
Gabby, did you have anything to add?
I was trying to think if there's
No,
anything.
I feel like I'm putting y'all on the spot, but I don't want to just like move on to the next question if you have something to say. So no pressure.
Fair enough. No, yeah, I mean, I think Het covered the majority of it. I would say the only other thing that also goes into it is, considering potential constraints, whether there be right of way or anything else like that. But the main factors that are going into guiding that are kind of all the elements that Het was discussing, and certainly, public feedback and keeping in mind where the major activity generators are. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Greg, sorry, can you respond to the assumption that I had in my head with the half a mile, quarter mile? Because I mixed that up in my head.
Sure. So a typical local bus service is about a quarter mile. BRT works best at a half mile or a third of a mile, excuse me. And the real benefit is, one, you're just not stopping as many times, decelerating the vehicle, opening the doors, loading, accelerating, possibly getting caught at a signal, etc. But it also just allows for a more reliable ride, because you're having to hit less time points along the way. So that's sort of the thinking that goes into there. Now, in a situation like downtown and even some of these other locations along the corridor, what's really nice is you get to extend that footprint pretty readily by having the bicycle and pedestrian connections, by having the other routes, the circulators, things like that connect up. Excuse me. So your trip, getting from wherever you are to the station may not be walking in a third of a mile. It could be jumping on an electric scooter, things like that.
Thank you. This next question is for Mila. Mila, can you talk about future art integration into the Southern BRT project and what that might look like?
We are currently working with artist in residence, and her name is Dare Coulter. And what we are doing is we're looking at a couple of things. One is opportunities to integrate art throughout the system. So identifying blank canvases or areas along the corridor or within the station where art could be integrated in a meaningful way to reflect the character of the community. And also what Dare is doing, she's also working with New Bern corridor on identifying specific ideas. So as we will advance to a similar process with Southern Corridor, we will have potential Dare or another artist in residence who will work with the community directly, and we will have those canvases identified, but it will be up to the community to tell us what kind of art and what kind of ideas and themes the art should be translating for the corridor. So that's pending, and we will start that work as we advance in design. We are gathering some feedback right now for art integration for the survey. So if you had an opportunity, or if you didn't have an opportunity to take the survey, please take the survey for the Southern Corridor and help us. Please answer the questions about art and help us gather information that we can then take and start analyzing the data and pulling some key themes that we think should be integrated into the art in the stations.
Thank you. So since we brought up stations again, there was a question about what type of amenities will be included in the station design. Specifically, will the public be able to charge their phone if they're sitting at the station waiting for the bus? So Het, if you want to take this first.
Yeah, I can do that. So yes, we are planning on having some USB charging capabilities at the stations. Although, I think with the BRT frequency, we expect someone to not have to wait that long at a BRT station. So, but our BRT vehicles and the regular bus fleet vehicles as well do have some USB charging capabilities that are on the buses themselves. So that amenity is provided. Also, the station design itself will have weather protection, wind protection, Those are some of the standard elements. We'll have level boarding in most areas that we can accommodate that, which that basically means it's easier to get on and off the bus because the bus is level when it pulls up. It will have real-time arrival information, as well as some interactive components to wayfinding and being able to, while you're at the station, look at what's potentially around you. If you're trying to get to different locations, sort of getting people a better understanding of where they are on the BRT system, as well as what's around them. So those are some of the components that are included. I mentioned the bicycles, and the bicycles being allowed on the buses. And that's one that I'm very excited about. I'm going to pass it to Mila to see if I've forgotten anything else on that station elements or amenities.
No, I think you've covered it all. And we're also looking at various sustainability features within the stations, making them solar ready, looking at how we can capture stormwater. But I think you've answered that question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both. So again, going off stations, there was a question about the branding process, because again, we are asking for feedback on the branding through the virtual open house and the 3 surveys that are currently live. What are the next steps for the branding process? And Mila, if you could take the first stab at this one.
Thank you, Meg. So the next step is really we're trying to figure out, we have our concepts, we work with our stakeholders, with our municipal partners, we had listening sessions. So right now we're just really waiting for the public feedback to see where we can land. We started with public feedback before we began to generate any concepts. And we are concluding this process with public feedback to figure out, to help us narrow down some of the options. So we are eager to see the results, and then we can hopefully narrow it down and present to council. And feel free to jump in. I know you have been very involved with branding process, so you know it inside.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add in the next steps is what I had mentioned as part of the end of the presentation that we had to begin the evening. Basically, once we have the feedback that Mila mentioned, we will be moving forward to how the brand actually gets integrated into the station design, what that would look like, how does a brand get applied to a BRT vehicle, what the BRT vehicle would look like. So those are kind of the next steps once we have this public feedback completed and we have a brand logo element and some of the key elements of the brand identified.
Thanks, Het. All right. I click around for the next question. Just a general next steps, again, question for the project. What comes next for the Southern Corridor? What is the design team currently working on, and what's going to come in the next couple of months? And Greg, if you want to take the first stab at this one.
Sure. So right now we're in the process of working with the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, to become a full-fledged project that they believe has merit and something that would be called project development. At that point, we're really going to start working on what we call sort of sketch level design. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 0 to 5%. The idea being we just want to make sure that generally we can fit things in. Once we move past that, we'll be getting into probably I don't know, say end of the summer, early fall, a little bit more detail. We start to look at survey information, start to look at potential environmental impacts, look at the populations that are served to make sure that we're providing equitable service, things of that nature. And then it'll sort of move into a much more technical direction after that, getting into the nuts and bolts of where, specifically a turn lane would be or a bus stop would go, et cetera.
Gabby, anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I think Greg covered it. That's the part that once we have the FTA's kind of approval on the project development process, the project becomes eligible for the federal reimbursement, future federal reimbursement. And so that's when we would really hit the road with the 0 to 30% design work, start working on the environmental documentation, and kind of move the project through that PD process that Greg mentioned. And we would start to, narrow down exactly what our running way options look like, and sort of get to a lot of the fun stuff of showing people the typical sections of what to expect along different segments of the corridor, finalizing those station locations, and sort of moving forward in that design process.
Thank you both. Gabby, do you want to add? From the town of Gardner side?
Yeah, no, I think Greg and Het did a very good job of covering that one.
Okay. Awesome. Well, the questions that have been submitted through public input have slowed. So we will be wrapping up just a little bit early. At this point, in BRT live Q&As, our public engagement has started a little tradition, which I'd like to continue today. So at the end of each live Q&A, it's been really fun to hear from the panelists which part of the project has been most exciting to them, or what they're most looking forward to as a result of the project. So I'd like to ask each panelist, can be super small or big picture, which part of the project is most exciting to you? And Het, if you want to start.
Sure, I can start. I'll try to go with something else this time, because I've said my bicycles on buses too many times. That is very exciting to me. But I think one of the other things that I'm excited about is the fact that the bus rapid transit comes with something that may be new to a lot of the transit users, but it actually enhances the transit user experience. With the station design work that we're doing and the amenities that are provided, it's something that really will provide a transit option that maybe people were not expecting, and provide that, higher quality of life option to try to get from place A to place B without being in your car. And I think that's something that really is cool.
Thanks, Het. Gabby, you want to go next?
Yeah, so, kind of following up on that same sentiment that Het had, I think BRT is kind of the beginning in this region of some more premium transit, and hopefully, for those who maybe haven't considered transit in the past because they didn't have the most positive perception of it, I think that this will be a good opportunity, for people to realize what the potential for what transit is. And just having lived in other higher density areas and seeing how bad the traffic can get, I'm just excited about the fact that there will be other transportation options in the area, and hopefully, hopefully the Triangle region is able to avoid the escalation in traffic congestion that some other areas in the country have experienced. So excited about that more than anything else. And also, I live pretty close to the Southern Corridor, so selfishly, I'm kind of excited for that option too.
Nothing wrong with that. Mila, if you'd like to go next.
Yes, thank you. I'll jump in. And I think it's very exciting to bring this new mode of transportation to this area. I think we all, at least on this panel, we've toured different systems, and we took pictures, and we rode those BRT lines, and we talked to the project managers and planners who made it happen. And we also, people actually get into the station and making BRT part of their regular day-to-day life. Nothing special, it's just, it got integrated. So it would be so cool to eventually get to that point here and bring it to this area so that it becomes part of the daily life, and we will finally stop talking about BRT, something like a magical unicorn that no one has ever seen, but everyone's talking about. So this is very exciting. I can't wait to see this happen and actually see people use it.
Last but not least, Greg.
Thanks. I really believe that transit has the opportunity to improve the quality of life for people. When you look at this line itself and thinking about the transit-oriented development that could come in, especially affordable housing, opportunities to live, work, along the Wilmington Extension, and then you take it out larger and you look at how this is going to connect into the other BRT routes within the larger network, you could be able to go very easily from Garner to Cary via Raleigh and be able to access so many shopping opportunities, employment opportunities, living opportunities, recreation opportunities that a lot of people probably don't have access to today. So just by expanding the footprint of your world, basically, without needing a car, as Het was saying earlier, is something that's really special, and I think is really helpful for a lot of people to just be bigger in the world.
I like that answer. I'm sorry, the cat's about to jump into the video. Well, thank you all so much for answering my, little bit out there question, continuing our tradition. As we have not gotten any further questions from the public, I do want to thank everybody for viewing tonight. Please go to the Virtual Open House website to find more details, contact us with any more questions, and we are happy to answer those. So thank you everyone again, and thank you to our panelists for answering all of the questions tonight. Everyone have a great night. Thanks.